In 2025, the Walt Disney Company shattered a global box office record, $6 billion in ticket sales. And yet, behind the celebration, something was rotting. In the same year, Disney quietly burned hundreds of millions of dollars on failed movies, laid off thousands of employees, and watched its stock fall while the market surged. This wasn't a sudden crash. It was something far more dangerous. A slow collapse hidden behind nostalgia, iconic characters, and a century-old brand people wanted to believe in. Once upon a time, Disney represented magic, imagination, and creative perfection. Now, it represents something else entirely: overconfidence, eternal chaos, and a company struggling to control the empire it built. The most powerful entertainment company on Earth didn't fall because it ran out of money. It fell because it stopped saying no. And when discipline disappears inside a giant, collapse doesn't come with an explosion. It comes quietly, quarter by quarter, decision by decision. This is the story of how Disney began losing control from the inside. For most of the past century, the Walt Disney Company was not just a business, it was a cultural institution. Founded in 1923, Disney didn't merely produce films. It defined childhood for generations. Mickey Mouse wasn't just a character. He was a global symbol. Disney films weren't content. They were events. Parents trusted the brand. Children grew up inside it. Entire families built traditions around it. By the late 20th century, Disney had mastered something no other company could replicate: emotional monopoly. Then came the empire phase. Disney didn't just create stories anymore, it owned universes. Pixar revolutionized animation. Marvel dominated global box offices for over a decade. Star Wars became a multi-generational money machine. Each acquisition made Disney feel less like a studio and more like an unstoppable force of nature. Financially, the numbers were staggering. Tens of billions in annual revenue. Theme parks packed year-round. Movies opening $2 billion runs as if it were routine. But Disney's true power wasn't money, it was trust. Audiences believed that if a movie carried the Disney logo, it would be worth their time. Investors believed Disney knew how to turn creativity into cash better than anyone on Earth. Competitors didn't just fear Disney, they studied it. Inside the company, this era felt invincible. Failures were rare, hits were expected, and success became normalized. Disney didn't see itself as just another media company competing for attention. It saw itself as the standard. And that belief, that Disney could do no wrong, that its brand could absorb any risk, any decision, any misstep, quietly changed how the company thought. Because when a company dominates for long enough, it stops asking one critical question: what if we're wrong? And that was the moment the empire began to drift, long before the losses ever appeared. This is where everything went wrong. Disney didn't collapse because audiences stopped loving stories. It collapsed because Disney stopped protecting creativity as a scarce asset and began treating it like an industrial output. For decades, Disney operated with one unspoken rule: quality came before quantity. A movie had to earn its existence. That rule quietly died. As streaming wars escalated and Wall Street demanded constant growth, the Walt Disney Company made a decision that seemed logical at the time and catastrophic in hindsight. Disney decided it needed more. More movies, more series, more franchises. More content, faster, everywhere. Executives believed the brand was strong enough to carry the weight. They believed audiences wouldn't notice. They believed volume could replace patience. And most dangerously, they believed past success guaranteed future obedience. Inside the company, decision-making shifted. Creative risk was replaced by committee approval. Original ideas were seen as liabilities. Established IP became a safety blanket. Marvel stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like an obligation. Star Wars became an assembly line. Animated films were greenlit to meet schedules, not standards. Budgets exploded. Scripts rushed. Marketing grew louder to compensate for weaker stories. Disney wasn't failing loudly, it was overproducing quietly. Every release was justified internally with the same logic. It's Disney. It will work. But audiences felt the difference immediately. Stories felt familiar. Characters felt hollow. Emotion was replaced by formula. What Disney executives saw as brand consistency, audiences experienced as creative exhaustion. This wasn't one bad movie. It wasn't one controversial decision. It was a systemic shift from craftsmanship to throughput. And once that line was crossed, the damage became inevitable. Because when creativity turns into a factory process, magic doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes. Release after release. Decision after decision. By the time Disney realized audiences were pulling away, the machine was already too big to stop. The empire didn't collapse from a single blow. It collapsed because it forgot the rule that built it. When you stop saying no, your customers eventually do. The backlash was instant and brutal. What started as quiet disappointment turned into open hostility, played out in real time across social media, podcasts, and headlines. Audiences didn't just stop clapping, they started talking back. For the first time in decades, the Walt Disney Company wasn't controlling the narrative. The internet was. Every new release became a referendum. Trailers were dissected frame by frame. Box office weekends turned into public trials. Comment sections filled with the same accusation over and over again. This doesn't feel like Disney anymore. Hashtags calling for boycotts trended. Reaction videos exploded in views. Memes mocked the company's once untouchable image, turning magic into material for ridicule. The criticism didn't stay anonymous. High-profile figures openly joined the conversation. Elon Musk publicly mocked Disney's leadership decisions, amplifying skepticism among investors and fans alike. Joe Rogan discussed Disney's creative decline on his show, exposing the controversy to millions beyond traditional film audiences. Once that line was crossed, the damage accelerated. Disney had spent decades cultivating trust, especially with families. Now parents questioned whether new releases were worth their time. Longtime fans felt alienated. Casual viewers simply moved on. The most dangerous part wasn't the outrage, it was the indifference that followed. Movies that once dominated cultural conversation now passed quietly through theaters. Series launched and vanished within weeks. What used to feel like an event became background noise. Internally, Disney responded with statements. Externally, the audience responded with silence. And silence is far more lethal than anger, because outrage can fade. But when people stop caring, they don't come back easily. By the time Disney attempted to course correct, the internet had already delivered its verdict. The magic wasn't gone, but the patience was, once the crowd turns. Even empires built on dreams can't escape the consequences. Feelings don't sink empires, numbers do. And the numbers surrounding the Walt Disney Company tell a far darker story than any online argument ever could. In a year when the broader market surged, Disney's stock lagged badly, underperforming major indices and erasing tens of billions in shareholder value. Investors weren't reacting to noise. They were reacting to risk. At the box office, the headline looked impressive: billions in global revenue. But beneath that surface was a brutal reality. Multiple big-budget films lost over $100 million each, once production and marketing costs were fully counted. Hitting $6 billion in ticket sales didn't mean Disney was winning. It meant Disney was spending more than ever to earn less confidence than before. Streaming told the same story. For years, Disney's direct-to-consumer division burned billions of dollars quarter after quarter. Subscriber growth slowed, churn increased. Profitability only appeared after aggressive cost-cutting, not because the model suddenly worked, but because spending was slashed. Meanwhile, linear TV advertising declined sharply, dragging down once reliable cash flows. The old engine was shrinking. The new engine was overheating. Even Disney's strongest fortress, its theme parks, showed cracks. Attendance softened as ticket prices climbed. Per guest spending rose, but only because fewer visitors were paying more. That's not momentum. That's pressure. And then came the layoffs. Thousands of jobs cut. Entire teams restructured. Projects quietly canceled. When a company built on imagination starts trimming creators and engineers, it's not optimization, it's triage. Individually, each number could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern no executive presentation could hide. Revenue was still massive, the brand was still famous. But efficiency collapsed, trust weakened, and the margin for error disappeared. Disney wasn't bankrupt. It was something more dangerous. A giant still standing, but bleeding in plain sight. To understand why Disney's collapse wasn't an accident, we need to strip away emotion and look at structure. At its core, the Walt Disney Company didn't fail because it made bad content. It failed because its incentives became misaligned internally, strategically, and culturally. The first fracture was strategy drift. Disney never clearly decided what it wanted to be in the streaming era. Was it a premium studio that released fewer unforgettable stories? Or a platform fighting a volume war against tech companies? It tried to be both. To satisfy Wall Street, Disney chased scale. To protect its legacy, it promised quality. Those two goals pulled in opposite directions, and quality lost. The second failure was misreading the customer. Disney assumed its audience would behave like subscribers, not fans, that they would consume endlessly. That loyalty meant tolerance. But Disney's core audience, ISNT, addicted to content, they re-emotionally invested in meaning. When releases began to feel rushed, repetitive, or hollow, viewers didn't protest loudly at first. They disengaged. Disengagement is invisible until it's too late. Then came organizational paralysis. As the company grew, decisions moved further away from creators and closer to committees. Risk aversion increased. Greenlights became safer and therefore weaker. Original ideas struggled to survive layers of brand protection, legal review, and corporate forecasting. Ironically, the system designed to avoid failure guaranteed mediocrity. Another critical mistake was capital allocation. Disney poured enormous budgets into content meant to fill pipelines, not shape culture. Spending increased, but returns didn't scale. Instead of creating a few timeless hits, Disney funded dozens of expensive maybes, hoping averages would save the model. They didn't. And finally, leadership timing mattered. Disney's leadership transition happened during a structural industry shift. Streaming economics were still unproven. Consumer behavior was changing. Competition wasn't sleeping. It required ruthless focus. Instead, Disney tried to preserve everything at once. Old TV models, new streaming ambitions, global parks expansion, franchise dominance. No system can optimize all directions simultaneously. The result wasn't a dramatic implosion, it was erosion. Margins shrank. Creative confidence faded. Audiences lost emotional urgency. Disney didn't lose because it lacked talent, money, or brand power. It lost because it stopped making hard trade-offs. And in business, when you refuse to choose, the market chooses for you. By the time Disney recognized the depth of the problem, it wasn't fighting competitors anymore. It was fighting its own momentum. When results collapse, leadership never stays untouched. Inside the Walt Disney Company, the fallout didn't happen on a stage. It happened behind closed doors in boardrooms, emergency calls, and silent restructurings. The first signal was reversal. Die. After a short and turbulent leadership experiment, Disney did something almost unthinkable for a company of its size. It called back the past. Bob Iger returned, not as a visionary conqueror, but as a crisis manager. That alone spoke volumes. Iger's mandate wasn't growth, it was damage control. Budgets were slashed. Projects quietly disappeared. Entire teams were dissolved. Thousands of employees were laid off, many of them creators, engineers, and storytellers. Publicly, the language was calm. Privately, the message was clear. The old way had gone too far. Leadership began walking back promises. Release schedules were slowed. Franchises were reevaluated. Risks suddenly mattered again. But these corrections came with a cost. Internally, morale fractured. Creatives felt blamed for systemic failures they didn't design. Managers became cautious, knowing that one bad quarter could end careers. No single executive was publicly destroyed. No dramatic firing made headlines. Instead, something worse happened. Authority weakened, confidence evaporated, and decision-making slowed under fear. Disney didn't experience a leadership explosion. It experienced a leadership implosion. Quiet, controlled, and deeply destabilizing. Because when an empire has to retreat to its past to survive the future, it's no longer leading the industry. It's trying not to fall behind. Disney's story isn't just about movies, streaming, or theme parks. It's a warning. It's not about failure, but about what happens after too much success. The first lesson is brutal and simple. Scale does not protect you from bad decisions. Disney believed its size could absorb mistakes, that its brand was strong enough to smooth over weak execution. But scale doesn't forgive, it amplifies. When a giant missteps, the damage multiplies. The second lesson is about customers and loyalty. Disney didn't lose its audience because people hated the brand. It lost them because it took their patience for granted. Loyal customers are not passive. They are emotionally invested. An emotional investment comes with expectations. When those expectations are repeatedly ignored, loyalty doesn't explode into anger. It fades into distance, and distance is deadly. The third lesson is about creativity. Creativity is not a resource you can industrialize without consequence. Once creativity becomes a pipeline instead of a craft, quality turns optional, and magic disappears. Disney didn't run out of talent. It ran out of restraint. And finally, there is the leadership lesson. The hardest job of leadership isn't growth. Saying no when saying yes feels safer. Every empire falls the same way, not because it stops innovating, but because it stops protecting what made innovation possible. Disney is still standing, still powerful, still rich, but its story now carries a scar, one every business should study closely. Because the market doesn't punish arrogance immediately, it waits. Disney's story is still unfolding. This isn't the end of the empire, but it is the moment where the illusion cracked. What happens next will define whether Disney regains control or continues drifting. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Disney can truly recover its creative discipline? Or has the age of untouchable entertainment giants finally ended? Leave your thoughts in the comments. This channel exists for people who want to understand how empires rise and how they quietly fall. If you want more deep, dramatic breakdowns of real business disasters, make sure you subscribe. There's new stories every week. No hype, no noise, just the truth behind the numbers. And if you want to see what happens when another global empire loses control, watch the next video on your screen now, because the next collapse is never as far away as it seems.